Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, what you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Hi, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. We continue our series on realizations that come as a result of ensoulment practice today, and the realization du jour that things are not our concepts of them. This is one of our first Sagehood episodes in a long while, and it was both refreshing and nauseating to return there, at least for me. How many times do people say that? That was both refreshing and nauseating. Yes, we're talking about the pre-dual. We addressed the difference between pure Zen and Identity's take on enlightenment, as well as some of the other variations out there, the difference between transcendence and healing algorithms, which is never enough to talk about, the metaphysical limitations of non-duality and its subtle dead end, and of course, much more. Thanks so much for listening. Just for fun this time, you join our conversation already in progress. Not at all. I'm becoming less and less sure in each moment, and then eventually I'll forget it entirely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it becomes a good question of what's the value of those fleeting observations, you know?
Yeah, just like so much value and nothing. It's sort of like, what is the value of a pile of shit? It like nothing, or you could plant it somewhere and like it could grow something. But there's no inherent value to it, though.
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Existential projections of meaning, you know. So, let's get started here. We're already going.
Yeah.
We can reference that. That was a good semi-rabbit hole right there.
Yeah, so. Sure. Okay, here we go. Greetings and welcome to this probably Sagehood edition of the Heart of Soul. As the words come out of my mouth, they die like drying petals on a flower, falling to the ground. Were they ever there at all? Welcome, Stace.
Well, hello, you, whoever you are, and whatever. No, better to say whatever you are.
What? Yes.
Whatever.
Yeah, because Sagehood and for Identity is the domain of what are you?
Yes.
And just a brief thank you to our sponsor, the Victimhood Hotline, which you heard about last time. That number again is 512-666-7475. Operators are standing by to help anyone who feels like it's all happening to them. We're here for you. So, we're going to talk about, we have another realization in the arbitrary list, which is, it seems even more hilarious. I've created so many lists that were very intentional, like X number in whatever order. And I love, this is just a random list of 18 things. And somehow it's taking us on a journey. This is number 7. And this one steers us into Sagehood, that things are not our concepts of them. I can see that you both have an idea where to start with that, and also there is no idea at the same time. So I won't even ask if you know where you want to start, because you do and you don't.
Well, since this is a podcast, we'll endeavor to use words, but with a lot of caveats to that. The way that you phrase this particular entree into a sagely topic, that things are not our concepts of them, it presupposes a lot of dimensions of consciousness that we could slowly and gently unpack a bit. So let's start with the fact that all words come out of silence. Now, that makes sense to our brains that compute. Noise is secondary to the silence that allows us to experience the noise, right? So we couldn't hear anything of substantive noisiness unless there was a pre-meta field of silence try talking metaphysics at an NBA basketball game. You will not have enough silence to communicate tenuous conceptual offerings.
That's why I always have hated bars and noisy restaurants. It's like there's a structural inability to have meaningful conversation. And then I realized that that's actually by design on some level. It's like we can all come together and drink, and no one will have even a possibility to speak something of controversy because you can't get to that level of depth. And then the alcohol would wash that away anyway.
Anyway, sure. Yeah. So even my experience over a long life is that even Westerners conversant with the East's way of trying to get across through either edict or offering what they are talking about when they talk about the non-dual or enlightenment in general. I find that Westerners who are even conversant with it still I don't really get it all the way in the juicy way that it's offerable. So that one thing that makes sense to our brains, if we start with that, because what we're going to talk about today doesn't make sense for our normal everyday firing of neurons that we capture reality with, we could say. But if we can start with that, noisiness is downline of silence.
Not opposite it.
Yes, not opposite. Mm-hmm. Joseph, that right there, most people would just take that as a given. Oh yeah, I never thought of it that way, but that's true. But you would think then we go to dualistic oppositeness so fast. Mm-hmm. It's like a fear is not the opposite of love, for example. Mm-hmm. It's the impediment to love, not the opposite. So in the same thing, Joseph caught it right away there, that silence is upstream, structurally, metaphysically upstream of noise, not its opposite.
And that's the reason that's important, is because most people unconsciously relate to, and that's just one example, they relate to silence and noise as being opposites. That's actually a applied existential moment-to-moment way of relating to reality. Because if someone experiences a sound as opposite of silent, what that would tell me is, this is where words start to fail. I would just say casually, you're not experiencing what's actually happening in reality, which is all of the sound is arising out of silence. It's not instead of silence.
Goodness.
It's the plant growing out of the ground. The plant isn't opposite the ground. It's coming from the ground.
Yes.
And that's actually something that can be experienced in a moment-to-moment way.
Yeah, as long as you're, for most Westerners anyway, when they get a cogently consistent word sentence like you just did, then you can experience it. But that's not how we're conditioned. And that's what why I loved you said, and it's not the opposite. Mm-hmm. Why this is so significant is, let's go with a computer metaphor of ones and zeros too. There's another way we can come at sagehood these days because of computers.
Strange bedfellows indeed.
Yes, isn't that an ironic, sardonic kind of possibility? In other words, we could say that one only gets, following the same silence and noise thing, one only gets its edges as one, as the number one, in contrast to, not in opposite, but in contrast to the zero. If there's no such thing as zero, you couldn't say one. Mm-hmm. But if there really was, if there was a real thing as one, there can't be a real one without a zero, but there can be a zero without a one. Let me dial that back just slightly. In other words, zero here is silence, and that allows noise to be. Uh-huh. Zero allows one to be. You wouldn't say noise allows silence to be.
Right.
That's backwards. So it's a little counterintuitive, but one gains its reality by the zero. It
Yeah. I
has
remember in philosophical terms, and I remember learning this and not getting why it was important or even what it meant. In my freshman year of college and intro to philosophy, we would say the zero is ontologically
yes.
at the level of being prior, ontologically prior. This goes way back to, I think Aristotle was the first one to talk about that kind of stuff. It's the same way the page is ontologically prior to the word you write on it.
Correct. So what we're saying here is there's some wonderful metaphors in our everyday life for this inexplicable, a literally inexplicable description of the nature of the zero, or the non-dual, that which has no opposites.
Yeah, and then then the dualistic mind goes, "Oh, you mean nothing?" Like, no, it's not a thing, but that doesn't mean it's nothing.
Yes.
And there's actually a scene in Ulysses, in the James Joyce novel, where there actually talks about that in the confusion between no thingness and nothing.
Oh, that's a wonderful distinction. I didn't know it was in the Ulysses. I didn't know that. Yeah, we in English we make a mashup over between nothing and not a not thing, or a no thing. And so now that we're sort of I'm hoping that just this short little conversation so far, there's some part of you and a lot of the listeners, I hope, is going, wait, what? Wait, what? I never thought of it that way. If that's going on in listeners right now, you're on track.
I've got another wrinkle to add here. I'm pretty sure I learned this from you, if I'm not mistaken, but I would just invite listeners to look at a piece of thing, a stuff, a bottle or a table or your shoes or whatever. That's a thing in your reality right now. And then consider the space that allows that thing to be there. Non-duality. And so you're looking at the thing, and then you can conceive of the space, and you can see the space, right? There's air there in that space. Non-duality, correct me if I'm wrong, is the space that allows the space to be there.
Yes.
That's the zero we don't consider.
That's the difference. It's not, and a lot of teachers will use the phraseology that it's not nothing, but then they don't go on to really parse that a bit.
Yeah.
It's prior to space. Space is empty. It's not. I mean, but we can say it's empty such that I can move my hand through it.
It's relatively empty.
It's relatively. There's air there, but if you take away air and the gaseous, whatever gases are comprising the air right now, there is space. But what we talk about, or what the East talks about as the non-dual, is that which allows space to be ontologically prior to space, is this non-dual. And in the same way that space is ontologically prior to the objects that are allowed existence within that space. And that's why I start with the word non-dual, but I've gotten so far out of that, it's much clearer to offer the term pre-dual for the non-dual. And so I use that almost always now, but we'll start out with what the world has taught us to do. Yeah. But this short lesson right here, that the non-dual pre-dual allows empty space to be, and empty space allows objective substantiveness to be.
It just hits me. I'm just thinking about how, because I've talked about I don't know what I want to say 10 things at once. I've talked about transcendental metaphysics with so many people and have run into so many conditioned ideas about what non-duality / pre-duality is really about, what enlightenment is really about, which 99% of it I learned from you. And I was just thinking about the profound irony that the place where concepts are supposed to die is riddled with screwed up, distorted concepts such that it completely... I mean, this is what always happens to the greatest teachings of our world. The shadow aspects of human beings turn it into the very opposite of what it was about to begin with. You know, one of the things the Buddha's primary teachings was that the things are not our concepts of them. And then, but most people's understanding of what his teachings are a bunch of very distorted concepts that have nothing to do with what he actually taught. That's so crazy. But that's what happens.
Analogous to how Christians find no, especially born again or conservative political Christians, find no contradiction in being racists, yes, cruel, when they profess to be the followers of one of the supposedly most compassionate human beings who ever walked the planet.
Yeah, it's
same principle here.
But it's far more subtle in Buddhism, and that's why it's more insidious. It's like the Western religions, it's very gross to see the contrast. But because transcendental metaphysics are so subtle and sophisticated, it allows people to sit with their concepts. Like, think about the millions of meditators in the world who still think it's about clearing your mind.
Yes.
And like, I almost would rather they think that, Jesus was the Son of God, because at least like you can get your hands around that or something.
Well, yeah, and what you're alluding to, if we back out just a little bit with our lens, with our blur a little bit here, what is ideation itself? And so let's talk about that, because when Joseph says here exactly that things are not our concepts of them. What are concepts? Let's define our terms here. And this is exactly why when most non-dual teachers or gurus hold space or go forward or do a Dharma talk, they really don't talk about transcendental metaphysics.
No.
They're just with that which that is and is not, however you want to frame it, in action, in the moment, hoping to then counter-illuminate the jumbled confusions of ideational duality that the followers are struggling to transcend.
And in so doing, they negate the duality that the people are in.
Yes.
Creating a big old mess, which is one of the reasons why we call it pre-dual, which was your turn of phrase, which is brilliant. In terms of, in one word, to summarily shift everything. I remember the week when you came up with that. It was like, that's metaphysically coherent.
Yeah. And that's what makes it always been frustrating for me, because even my own teacher way back in the day, he was just holding forth, abiding with that which ontologically is prior to ideation. And it was better just described as pre-dual, but there was never a jovial kind of soft thing like we're doing here to take apart what enlightenment or what pre-dual access involves, and how it changes literally the ideational chemistry of our brain. So that was always disappointing to me, because I know once I had a conversation with, who was it? It wasn't my teacher, it was somebody else. Oh, one of the ones that were in that film that was made about me and a lot of these other teachers.
Yeah.
Where they shy away from the philosophy of it, because that they say is anti-enlightenment. That's a dualism that goes against their very mind. But if you hold it as pre-dual, I mean, we maybe did that a little fast for listeners, but you want to unpack what the problem is for that? Because I just immediately get set off by it. It pisses me off so much. Well, as soon as they say that something is not resonative with, I'll use my language, pre-dual reality, which is ontologically prior to ideation, they use an ideation as some sort of negative thing that resists that which my statement comes out of in the first place.
Yeah.
Right?
It discludes.
It discludes.
Non-dual is supposed to be the basis of everything, so
Yes.
it must include everything. If it doesn't include everything, then it's not non-dual.
Yes. And yet there's this line of demarcation of duality, non-duality, that term non-dual is inherently dualistic.
Yeah, it reminds me of the line from Orwell's Animal Farm, that it's like all animals are created equal. That was one of the original premises. And then later the pigs revise it to all animals are created equal, but some are better than others. It's like non-duality is the root of everything, but more some things than others. It's realer than duality. It's better than duality. But if you were to pin them down on it, they would never say that.
No, but the
they're saying
implication
it.
is
The implication.
constantly abiding with or as that which is pre-dual, previous to duality, is preferable and better than duality.
Right.
And that's automatically a demarcation line that the Buddha never had the demarcation line there. Like you just said, all duality, just like all the furniture in your room there for you doing your podcast, all the furniture is downline of the space that allows that furniture to be arranged in that way. Not only arranged in that way, but actually they can abide, that the sofa behind you abides in sofa-ness because it has space to do so. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, the pre-dual includes duality. And I've talked to a few people, and Ajya gets that in some way, but doesn't come at it directly and unpacks it this way that we're doing right now. That if all duality is allowed being by pre-duality, then there's no demarcation of anti-anything, better or worse. There are different things that happen to you if you live fully dualistically and never learn how to abide with the pre-dual reality of life. Certainly, and there's a freedom to it. There's a joyfulness. You take a beat moment of time in every moment when you're in that mode, that nothing exists until it arises. There's no pre-ideational. What do you do when you're learning your lines in a play? Rehearse. There's only rehearsal in duality-based ideation. There's no rehearsal in pre-dual access.
It just hit me as you were struggling to find the word rehearse. It's happening right now. One of the challenges I get, one of the reasons why teachers avoid the metaphysics of this, because the more you talk about it, the harder it gets to talk about.
Yes.
Because if you actually have access to it and you're talking about it, then it's sort of like it pulls the drain on duality and all of your words. Like my words feel like they're being drawn by a gravitational force down, and I can't get them out of my mouth because I just want to be quiet. So.
And there, even though Dafri John,
Adiga, Dafri John, what was his name? Franklin
Jones.
Franklin Jones.
Yeah. There is something to the Buddha field of someone who's got real access. And that's when I come from that, you're so sensitive to that because of our love and connect, when I abide in that place, which is not every moment of every day, but I'm always aware that I've got that access. It pulls the plug on too much ideation. And so you struggle to represent. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but this is all good preamble. Because let's go back to ideation and we'll return to the zero. Ideation is the one, and that which is ontologically prior to it is the zero. And we're talking about the zero today. So what is a word? First, let's go with that first. What is a word without a referent in reality? In other words, glass.
Yeah.
Okay.
Not wood. Not metal.
What's a word without a reference?
Yeah, what is that?
What
It's
is
sort of
that?
like you're trying to describe. I do this all the time with all the weird fruits we have here. Like people are like, well, what's a soursop taste like? And you're like, well, it's kind of like a pear and a pineapple together. Okay, well, if you didn't have those as reference, how would you describe it?
Right.
Well, it's kind of sweet and tart. Okay, if you didn't have those reference, then how would you you can't. You just run out. It's what it is. All you can do is just stick it in their mouth. That's the only real thing.
That's right. So, but we have to come at this with a little tenderness, though. That's exactly. I love what you just said. But word, what is wordness? What is it? Is there such a thing as a word, wordness, without a reference that fills the prior space of the space word?
Wait, you're talking about the concept before the word, or other words? Because there's a horizontal referential system, but you're talking about what is prior to a word? Oh yeah, that would be a concept.
We have to have let's put it in order of what we would offer as the sequence.
Uh-huh.
There has to be something out there first that we experience.
Okay.
That's first. I'm looking at the beautiful colors in the sofa. I look wherever I look, something pre-exists my experience of it. Okay. First, there is existence, reality. We'll get to the gurus who teach there's no such thing as real reality.
No,
I hope we get. That's a really interesting one. But since we find dinosaur bones and fossils, and we know that before human beings conceptualized, the world was. I mean, this is. It's so basic, and yet it's not really appreciated, the formality of that, because we secondarily registers something that's in reality outside of us, and then we represent it with an empty thing that we just call wordness, right? We represent. Even if it's a sound, if that comes at me, okay, so that's a word. But the experience predates the mental capacity to make a sound or a formalized structure out of the thing you're experiencing.
Yeah, like I'm reminded of when like an infant or a toddler sees like a cat or a dog for the first time. They're just like, wow. They become, there's no word for it. They're just like total engagement. They're just with the experience of it. And you can see like they're just taking the experience in a raw, pure way. And this is before they can speak. So they're not putting it into a word package yet.
Not yet. But that the capacity of the brain, we could just say, if I could be a little obtuse, it's categorical. A word without an external referent to define it is just a category of experience.
Say that one more time. A word without?
A word without an external thing to fill in the empty space of, like, wordness is an outline, wordness, but without an external referent to, like the cat or the sofa, to go into it. It just floats there as like an empty circle, right? So it's categorical. An idea or a concept starts out as a category of experience. It's categorical. So first there is an external reality, then we experience it, and then the third thing out of that experience is we make a sound or a word so we can say, oh, I saw the color scheme in Joseph's office. It's really magical in some way, very devic, a lot of devic colors there. And so in that sense, and this is what the Buddha really, if you boil everything down to what the Buddha was saying is, have experience without words. That doesn't mean you're not talking, but have experience because experience is prior anyway to our secondary abstraction of wordness. And then we put in a concept of, I store in my memory the sofa behind you, and now I can say, oh, that Divic colored sofa. The Buddha could say, well, yes, of course, that's all included. But people start with the fact that they have a concept. Oh, that's one sofa. Now, if you know what a sofa's basic organizational space form and space is, you can abstract that to an infinite number of sofas because it's got a horizontal aspect, it's got a vertical, it's got legs. So those are all downline different perturbations of it. But we're looking at primary experience. And that's what the Buddha was trying to get across here, is that there's a way to abide with the experience of something without making a concept about it. And that doesn't need to be silent. I'm doing it in this moment in a sort of a revolving closed circle, that I'm having an experience, and then I'm describing the experience of of having an experience that doesn't have words. But I'm using words to describe my experience that doesn't have any words associated with it. Now that you have to really get a little further along in enlightenment to really get. But the point we want to make here is that that which is pre-dual, which is pre-concept, because a concept is this concept versus that concept. A concept can't be a concept of the sofa, can't be the same thing as the concept of that beautiful purple a drape that's over your window there. So dualism means two things cannot be the same thing at the same moment. Two different things. A sofa is not a chair is not a wall. So we've got all this wonderful stuff that looks so natural to us. We don't think, where does it all come out of? What does it all come out of? And what's the nature of consciousness that allows it to come out in all the ways that we created civilization with? So back to our sequence. First, we have an experience, then we abstract the experience into some sort of concept.
Well, wait, but in a way that fits into our existing categories, if we have any, right? If we have any,
that's right. But the child doesn't have categories yet.
Right.
Its experience is building categorical reality, right? Just categories. And then later we learn to abstract that with our wonderful brains, and then able to communicate with each other at that level. But the normal discourse of human beings is lost in the normal discourse of beings, not with the prior spaces that allow discourse to be. And when we talk about pre-dual, we're talking about that which is ontologically prior to any concepts and then verbal expression of those concepts. So that's something that Westerners really don't get well taught by a guru, because they're just too busy getting affected by the pre-dual field dynamic. There is a real pre-dual field dynamic, so much so that Adida used to say, you can't enlighten unless you're inside of a Buddha field of a teacher. Meaning, you need me, folks, because you can't get there without it.
That me who doesn't exist.
Yes, the me that doesn't exist.
You need
any
him.
real thing. You need that to realize you don't exist.
Tickets are on sale now, right?
Right. So the reason this is also tickets on sale.
I don't exist. None of this has any meaning. But those dollars that have no inherent value, you could put them here so you can get enlightened.
All right. So we set the stage here. It's easy to describe when it's something outside of us.
Yes, right. I see where this is going.
Other people, blah, blah, blah. But Buddhism and the Far East, Buddhism and ancient Hinduism, is about asking the question, what is the thing that is me asking the question? What is a thing? What is my me thing? When you make an object out of the experiencer, this is where all the questions become really difficult and murky. It's easy to explicate when it's an external object. But when you're the object of your attention, that's why we say in identity, it's who we are as personhood, what we are as sagehood, what are we? And that is what the Buddha didn't put it that way, but I'd like to update that's what he was really saying. What are we when we make an object of our own consciousness, our own being, and then we ascribe a name to it, a gender to it, an age to it, all these things.
Yeah, i.e., who are we without the concept of ourselves? Before the concept of ourselves.
What are we without the concept of ourselves? What are we? That is the question the Buddha was living into. Not just the nature of experience, which is included in that, but when you're the nature of the experiencer.
Yeah.
Because if an Eastern teacher comes and just talks about how non-duality isn't the same thing as duality, okay, fine, but that's all external objects.
Yeah.
The experiencer of experience. What is that? What is that?
And that's why the idea in a lot of Zen practices is you do things like stare at a flower and say, what is that? What is that? What is that? This is not a flower. Right. And then usually that's the beginning, and then you start applying it to yourself. And I think on the podcast, I told that story about when I was in the grocery store and I asked myself if I ate chicken or not and almost passed out.
Yeah. Yes. Right. That's right. Yeah. Right.
Because I'd been doing a lot of meditating inquiry and I've been doing a lot of that stuff. And so that was a moment where the non-nounness of myself peeked through just through the unintentional koan I asked myself of, am I someone who eats chicken? And I went looking for that information somewhere as if it would exist like a book on a shelf, and fell down and almost passed out. I didn't actually fall down, almost fell down.
So if we boil all this esoteric stuff down to the real base metal, as a thing, what am I? Right? How do I go about finding out what I-ness is? That's the basis that the East starts with. And it takes so much deconditioning of mental stuff in the West that we just are unexamined for them to the West to really get what actually it's about. Oh, it's about transcending and being joyful and no, those are all downline effects. What is it in the essence?
Yeah, and there's that thing where people they take the sum of the end results and then turn that into the process.
Yes, right.
And that happens in so many things.
Yeah, they intuit or infer the nature of what enlightenment is pointing at, like pointing at the moon, by its effects, instead of what it is in its original beingness, right?
Yeah, I was talking to a client earlier today. This wasn't the original content of it, but it's an application of it. And they said, like, well, I want to be like on their list of things. I want to be less afraid of intimacy, or I want to be more comfortable in intimacy. And it's like, yeah, that's a good goal, but the process is to steer yourself toward the terror of intimacy. That's how you get that.
Yes.
But but our ego minds, or our shadows, or in the Identity's language, are green, the protector. It takes the end goal and turns it into the process.
Yes.
Thereby assuring it would never get to the end goal, tragically. And so all of these ideas, like we're talking about deconstructing and attending to the the like finest cut aspects of experiencing, which requires attention. And then that turns into, it's about mindfulness. It's like, no. That's a tool you have to use to do this other thing. It's not just be mindful. In fact, it's ultimately about not perceiving from your mind actually at all.
And
it will result in a greater relaxation in your life, but that's not the process. You have to steer yourself toward the terror of, I don't know what I am, in order to get there. And that just makes me crazy how that confusion happens.
Yeah, just the question. When I first held satsang for some people who were migrating away from our former teacher, I would start sometimes with, what is attention? What is attention?
Yeah.
And then it becomes a question of, who is experiencing attention, and what is that really? Is it a will-based thing? What is it? What is attention? These are the kind of questions that non-dual teachers just don't really get into with Westerners, and they really need to do that. Otherwise, all the motives for Westerners, for example, to get enlightened are all based on downline effects.
Yeah.
Not on experiencing the causes that create the effects, right? Mm-hmm. So right this moment, we'll take a quick moment. Mm-hmm. If you're listening to this and going, what are these people talking about? Yes. We're trying to short circuit the nominal way that you've been conditioned to identify your experience of everything, including yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's where the rubber really meets the road, is when you finally back off that things are not what we call them. They exist prior to we putting a label on them. This is not a glass. It's just what we call a glass. What is this? And you can just keep subtracting labels, which are all dualistic. A glass is not the same as a mouse for a computer, right? So you've got to keep subtracting labels. And that's one of the most earliest stages, as you say, referenced earlier. Things are not what we call them. But the next step level, deep is your statement here, that things are not our concepts of them. A concept has to predate a label. You have to have a concept before you can label it something. Mm-hmm. So we have a concept in our brain that this is a glass, and that I can make an infinite number of shapes of that glass because it holds liquid, you could say, and it's transparent, but it doesn't have to be transparent, blah, 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 blah. So in that sense, we're talking about that which is prior to what you've been conditioned to identify as everything, including yourself. Mm-hmm. This is not about leading you to a place of harmony and wa. This is about self-examination by subtraction until there's nothing left. Not nothing, but there's a not thing left. When you finally reach your subtractive self-examination all the way down to the pre-dual, you lose all sense of you-ness. You just lose it temporarily, and it will refill in, but forever changed afterward. Because at the moment that the pre-dual, you've thinned out yourself enough, not transcend, self-examine, not float off, but self-examine the self. What do we say always? Meditation, defined in Edenity, is you search for the meditator and find you can't find the meditator. That simple definition is so different than most
rather than practicing imagining that you don't exist.
Yes.
Or that things don't matter.
Right. Right. Those are all the middle things before the end results.
Yeah.
And they focus on the middle things, not the primary one.
And it can appear that those things are synonymous, but looking for sincerely and earnestly looking for the meditator, and then not intending to have the experience that you can't find it.
No.
But the same way, like if you're looking for, it reminds me of an old, I think this was in What is Enlightenment? It was like looking for the flashlight when the only point of finding the flashlight is to find the flashlight, which is a fun little thing. You're sincerely looking for the flashlight. Right. You will experience that you can't find it. It's not about trying to not find it. You go looking for it. Yeah. Transcendence is practicing the state of mind or being that there is no flashlight to be found.
Yes. And that's a preordained conclusion.
Yeah. And then just like whatever happens, remember there's no you. That's completely different than actually trying to find you and failing at it.
Yes. And this is what turns me into, I find myself, all my emotions about this become a pretzel because the East criticizes Western religion by they say where the Western religion grips onto the truth that there is a real I or a real soul that persists, that lives after death, blah, blah, blah. But when they say on the other side, they grip the truth of the opposite, that there is no I, and they lead with that. All of religion is based on the soul living after death, and you better prepare or else you're going up or down and all that nonsense. But when they say there is no such thing as an I, and they lead with that truth, they rob you of the discovery of what it is and what it isn't, just like equally metaphysically distorted as the soul that overgrips the I. They overgrip the not I, and then say all of the teaching that comes down is all based on the I as an illusion. Wait, just because you can't find the meditator one day and the pre-dual pops in and suffuses and reboots your whole consciousness doesn't mean there isn't a meditator. It's just that you can't experience that meditator. But it doesn't say, but when you say, I can't find the meditator, boom, the pre-dual comes, oh my God, the meditator was an illusion. Wait, what? Not necessarily. It feels like that. But on deeper examination, there's no deeper to go after you've been enlightened, because that's just using your mind of an illusion.
Yeah.
Right?
Can the fish find water? And if they can't, does it mean it doesn't exist?
Exactly. So ask a fish to start meditating on if you pre-tell the fish, you're swimming in water and you're not aware of it. And it goes, oh, okay, I want to experience that water. And then they keep going further and further in to find the fish in them, the experience inside them, the fish of water that they're swimming in, that's ontologically prior to their ability to be a fish. Just because they're told that there's no real fish doesn't mean there's no real water, or on the other side that there's no real fish. You just can't take a position. And this is what the freedom of why they called the Buddha the Lion of the Shakyas, Sakyas, because it literally, there's no, he lived a positionless moment-to-moment existence, not an empty thing, a positionless thing. There is a being that was gushing up in him, but he never stopped the river in any moment to say, here is this and that is that.
Yeah, but the best the dualistic mind can do to conceive of that is to say, well, that person is empty. And then that's where all these ideas, concepts come of, an enlightened person is calm and they don't say that much and they don't have opinions about anything. And then that's the concept that is supposed to be non-conceptual, that you're supposed to be, but that's just an enlightened identity. It just creates a new kind of noun.
Yeah, you get expanded. Expanded's okay. It's okay. You're less grippy in one way, but you're not really enlightened. And so all these gurus who have transcended their way to enlightenment, Edenity would say you haven't enlightened all the way. You've made some steps. That's cool. That's fine. No criticism.
And it's tricky because it's not uncommon for people to feel certain layers and levels and frequencies of the terror of not being, which Edenity would say is what you have to move through to get there. Right. But what it seems like to me, and I've heard Ajasanti talk about this, he says like, well, some people will experience that fear and some people won't. And what I got from that with the juxtaposition of Edenity is like, if you don't make the distinction between a emotional processing based enlightenment and a transcendent based enlightenment without that metaphysic, then you're going to end up with a roll of the dice enlightenment that's going to be part fear processed, anywhere in the continuum between total transcendence or probably not total fear processing, but it's going to be somewhere on there and it's going to be incomplete.
Yes.
To which they would say, incomplete according to who or what? And we'd say, according to a paradigm. Well, we don't subscribe to paradigms. Well, wait a minute. That non-subscription would be a paradigm, wouldn't it be? God damn it!
Oh, no. If they say that the I is an illusion and then deny that position underlies every single aspect of the Dharma, every single aspect, that preordained truth,
Mm-hmm.
and then claim they're not a paradigm. That's what I just have to shake the head that I'm trying to understand how they could possibly be duped into such a thing.
Well, they're
So,
dead-ending transcendence, just like people dead-end altruism and control, or making lots of money or having lots of power. They're just dead-ending that.
So identity, we're really not being linear here.
Less so than usual, even.
And that's part of this, because linearity, really, we've been conditioned to linearity, logic, and coherence. Okay, so this thing that we're going to say leads to that thing we're going to say, and then that gets clearer, and there's a sequence. But we're spiraling here. We're going wherever the rabbit hole. This podcast is arising out of the pre-dual as we speak. And one of the things that comes out of it, I want to underline this again, any position that says there is a real I or there is no real I are equally unenlightened. So if you've ever heard a guru start with the truth, there is no I, it's an illusion, it's all an illusion, they're just as off metaphysically as the Pope is in his position. They're both gripping a position.
It's a belief system. It's doesn't start, and this is not by accident. It starts with an invalidation or a disrespect of the individual's experience. The individual is supposed to experience their way to experiencing divinity. The individual is supposed to experience their way to experiencing what the nature of self is. And when you tell them what they're supposed to be experiencing, you've invalidated their self-authority. And now it's not an inside-out soul evolution process. It's an authoritarian control trip.
So if I let's take that to an example. that was beautifully said.
Thank you.
If I were to hold a satsang for interested people in what enlightenment is, just not Identity's version, just what enlightenment all these centuries have been teaching, I would the opening line is, if you're here to have it proven to you that the I is an illusion, I advise you, it'd be a lot easier if you just go to the Vatican and ask the Pope what a soul is. Okay, that at least it'll make it a lot easier on you, because this teacher is not going to start with the I is an illusion. I want to help anyone in the audience, if this was happening, to discover for themselves what the pre-dual, the access to the pre-dual ontologically prior to space, which is ontologically prior to substance. What does that do with you when you finally give room for it to rise up in you, to give it room to find you? I wouldn't tell people that the I is an illusion that it's based on. It's based on a discovery process that's a self-subtraction. And when you finally do aerate yourself of dualisms in the pre-dual, not by transcending and meditating on nothingness, but by subtracting the thing that you have been conditioned to call your you, let's discover together here.
Yeah, no, I'm appreciating so much how relational that is, rather than it's relationally and relationally and curiously explorative, rather than willfully addictive.
Oh yes,
like, this is how it is. This is how you should live. Deal with it. Versus let's explore together what your experience is, and in both Zen and devotional spirituality, it's exploring relationality with aspects of the divine.
Yes.
And so the Pope will give you a belief system, and the Zen master will give you a very, very subtle belief system that you don't exist.
Right.
But neither are relational to the divine yang or the divine yin or to you.
Yes. So let's summarize a couple of these things into some categorical.
If you can summarize this, I'll be very impressed.
Okay. So Identity offers that the question of whether the I is real or an illusion, that question itself is very sophomoric. Just as sophomoric as the ones that say the Pope would say there is a soul, believe it. If you don't, you'll never experience it, but you just got to believe us. And it's the same equally metaphysically. That idea that the I is an illusion is a poison that is put out there so upfront that it obviates the end results, in everyone to some degree limits what actually pre-duality imparts to us. So in that sense, let's summarize some of the concepts that we're talking about here. We can abstract what we've been talking about. Mm-hmm. Edenity would offer that transcending your way to the non-dual is a teenage form of enlightenment. We've got to do it a dozen or two times, maybe somewhere between 12 and 24 times in past lives, to one day realize that it's not about transcending duality to find that the I is an illusion. It's by deepening, searching, and not knowing you're going to find it, but realizing that as you self-subtract, it's not about transcending duality, it's about healing a meta-existential terror of not being. Now that rebasing the whole summary of what non-dual, pre-dual enlightenment is changes the whole ballgame. It undermines all the positionality and says there's an emotional state that if you don't find it in this life, if you enlighten and all of a sudden you're no longer dualistically impaired or dualistically asleep in samsara, you're enlightened, you're done. You're not, you're just beginning. Samsara is for teenagers. Because we would say, and here's where East and West and identity comes together, that the pre-dual is not nothing, it's not empty, it's not full, except the only thing you could say the pre-dual is full of is duality. It's full of duality.
In one way, yeah.
In one way.
Would you say, I've heard Adyashanti talk about, he uses the phrase sometimes, infinite potentiality. What do you think about that as a descriptor for what he would call the ground of being? Mm-hmm. Is there any sainthood in that? Is it a mix? Well, or is that pure Zen?
No, it's a really great question, because it isn't that it's not infinite amount of potentiality.
It could not be that.
It certainly is one way of describing it, because it means what's going to arise. If you're in potentiality, you haven't yet arrived on the other shore of the next moment.
Yeah.
You know, you're always on this shore of the next moment. You haven't gone to the next moment yet. Mm-hmm. So you could describe it that way. But we would say instead it is the capacity to self-experience.
Ontologically prior to self in that way.
Yes. And when you do it that way, not by transcending duality, but by trying to find the meditator and not being able to find it, you subtract your concepts about the self, and you keep having richer and richer and emptier experiences of yourself, thinner and thinner.
That ties me back to, I wanted to say this before, when you said, what was the question, what is attention? What is attentiveness? Mm-hmm. And it's weird because like my brain had it all worked out what I was going to say as if I'd said it, but I didn't say it before. I wanted to say, while you were talking about that, I felt into that because I don't remember ever doing that one before. What is attention? Like really looking at that. And I invite listeners to do that right now. So you're attending to something, but what is attention? That puts your attention prior to attention. And then I immediately start feeling nauseated in my third chakra.
Yes.
And that's the remaining fear of not being that I have, that I know.
Here to the process of attention.
Wait, back up to 10 seconds. You froze for a second. Back up.
Oh, okay. By focusing on the nature of attention, not the object of the attention, but the nature of attention, at some point, if you're really onto it, like Joseph just said, you might feel a little nauseous because you're actually in a much more proximity to that which you come out of every moment.
And that nausea is the false sense of self that starts to get destabilized, that's holding back the fear of not being.
Yes.
Right.
I love it. Let's go on down that rabbit hole. Then there's a false sense of self that's dualistically enmeshed.
Not illusory.
Not illusory, just dualistically enmeshed.
Mm-hmm.
That's a false sense of self. And that's supposedly, they start with that, oh, that's samsara, right? You get intertwined with your experience, you identify with your experience and all that.
Uh-huh.
But we're talking about something that is prior to that enmeshment. So literally, you're getting close when you start to get nauseous, that you can't find the nature of your quote unquote attention. What is attention in itself? Because there's attention without an object there. I'm going to attend on this mouse of my computer. I'm going to give it attention. Or I'm going to attend to nothingness. I'm going to put my attention on nothingness.
That would be that's a classic transcendence algorithm.
A classic transcendence, right? But if you priorly say, I'm going to put attention on nothingness, you've already dissonated with the whole process.
Yeah, you skipped over. Yeah, you're still in content, actually.
Yes, you're still in content. You've got to keep saying, what is it that allows me to know anything? What is attention? Is it just a focuser of that? Is really important. It can get people just like you just did right there, because you're so close to re-upping your full enlightenment this lifetime.
Making me feel sicker and sicker. And this, by the way, you could see how Socrates had some enlightened past lives, because this seed of the questions of well, what is this anyway? That's what he did. He just walked around saying, well, what is this? What is truth? What is beauty? And alienated people by challenging their dualistic concepts of stuff. Yeah. That was very much Zen inquiry.
Yeah, they think Socrates was about finding content that was unrevealed previously. No. But it's the very mechanism of consciousness that he was talking about without saying it. That was the case. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, let's come at the other end at the conclusion. I offer that if you reject the nonsense of transcending duality as the mechanism, the main algorithm of enlightenment, if you reject that's nonsense, or let's say not nonsense, it's not the end game. Yeah. It's rehearsal for the end game. One day you'll get to the place where you will focus not on. You'll be led to something with a teaching that doesn't already say that I is an illusion. Let's discover what the I is or isn't. That's the balanced, real way. And once you get in that domain, one day, it's your discovery, would be not mine. You will discover a terror of not being, as you actually have a gut experience of the thing that the false self you were holding on to isn't your real self. Mm-hmm. They would cast it as the false self is resisting the not self.
And in the transcendence algorithm, and I've talked with meditators about this, if the fear of not being does come up, which is not unusual to come up, right. At worst, what they do is let it go.
Yes.
They transcend that. And then slightly more advanced, they'd be like, well, okay, we'll just be with that as long as it's there. But we would say, no, turn it up to 11.
Yes. Go way further, sink into it.
Yeah. Allow that to be desire to feel all of that fear as much as possible. And that's a healing algorithm rather than a transcendence algorithm.
Exactly. And that's the game changer. Mm-hmm. Because when you do it that way, I offer listeners who've got some interest and stake or experience in this whole track of sagehood, when you reverse all these in these other ways and reject the teachings of the East as basic, you will find that which is pre-dual prior to your existence is actually part of divine being.
Mm-hmm.
It is not, right now, there's a fork in the road between devotional and non-devotional teachings of the East and West. One has a God, a substantive divinity of being, and the other one doesn't have it. The East has no divinity of being, except in some forms of Hindu versions of oneness, which are all really...
Yeah. So the transcendent algorithm delivers you to vaguely in the domain of oneness,
Yes.
separate from divinity and separate from yourself.
Yes.
The healing algorithm delivers you to all of reality. Well, at least this 1/3, but in a way that's integratable with the other 2/3.
Integratable.
The other two hoods.
We humbly offer in Edenity that both the East and the West, the devotional and non-devotional, are describing different aspects of divinity. So here, when you heal the terror of not being, you will discover, and here's the kicker, you'll realize that what we call the pre-dual, the pre-you-ness, when you lose all the grips first on yourself, then your essence you're investigating your essence, and then you break through to the pre-dual finds you. You will find, this is so sweet, what we call the non-dual pre-dual is just a few moments prior to your birth as a soul that still clings to your soul roots. It's like when you if you go down a plant down to the roots, and you get all the way to the bottom of the roots, right where they terminate in the dirt, and of course they're absorbing nutrients all along the root length. But at the bottom, the ones facing down, when you pull out a dandelion, a mature dandelion, not too mature because it's pretty tough, but you pull it all out, well, all the roots come out, And what's falling off the bottom of the roots when you do that? Dirt, right? In this metaphor, the pre-dual, that which cannot be conceived in any conceptual way, is the moments before the root birth of your soul out of divine being, out of one part of divine being into another part of divine being. So the actual nature of pre-duality is a yin version of divine being. We use a further metaphor. It's the womb space of divine yin's uterus metaphor. An empty space that precedes your birth of first self-awareness as a soul. And in that way links East and West, devotional and non-devotional, but not as a belief, an invitation to experience that yourself, not a position, just an offering. And when that happens, divine being can become just as lively a companion as they tell you to curate in religions. But you're also enlightened to the pre-dual. You can have both. I'm a walking version that this is possible. And other people who have gotten even partway, like Joseph, it was way more than partway. He's teetering, folks, as we speak.
That's why when I take showers outside, I stare at the Milky Way and try to conceive of how big it is and enjoy the experience of my conceptualization muscles failing. Yes. And try not to fall down.
And last but not least, not only when you allow the pre-dual divine womb space of the divine yin to find you, because the pre-dual allows you the few seconds, moments before your soul was born, clings to your soul roots. Then you realize later on, after, there's a God and there's pre-dual sagehood, sainthood and sagehood, you will discover that the I is real.
That's the fish experiencing water, but not able to conceive of it.
Yes.
And so having a different experience of itself without having to conceive of itself.
Yes, without having to conceive of itself. That's where the real, when we say the I is real, we do not say that that's a teaching as much as an offering to self validate. That you will find the I is real, the I of soul is real.
But there's no usefulness to the I being real or not real as a concept. Is really, we'd say that's only in your way of experience.
Depending how you grip it.
Yeah.
And put forms.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So in that sense, once you gain God out of enlightenment, you also gain the eternal I of soul. So all identity's dharma of seeking the terror of not being and letting it consume you until you burn away to nothing for a moment, because all that's burned away is your false conceptualized self, not your self of I, the I of soul, which is inextinguishable. It persists over lifetime, just like the Hindus say. But they don't call it a soul as much as they call it persistence of hanging on to duality. You just keep repeating and repeating. We have a very different picture where the I of soul pre-exists your present life and post-exists your present life. And you have a whole lifetime that's not human in other domains of consciousness. So identity offers all those things as the end game of its complete triune of dharmas of personhood, sagehood, and sainthood. You can't get to clean sagehood and sainthood unless you realize you're living a 2/3, 1/3 reality of a false earth self. You got to clean that up before you can really reap the benefits of a true, deeper enlightenment and a true, deeper experience of divine being, because you can't drive to the most authentic source being of all, divine being, with an inauthentic vehicle. You can't. No,
it burns down on the way.
It burns down on the way, but don't take our word for it.
Right.
If this intrigues you, come to a talk, a Dharma talk someday when we have a strictly sage Dharma talk, and we'll talk about the nature of attention.
There's that nausea again.
Yeah. Well, Joseph, we may just have found an algorithm specific to you. It's different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph is reacting nauseatingly to what is the nature of attention.
Well,
for you, it might be a different algorithm.
Yeah, right? What reminds me, it was in 2019. I remember specifically the teaching that brought me to the deepest awakening I'd yet had. I had a number of them, but this was by far the deepest, the one that stuck and cycled and still re-ups or unfolds more. I remember specifically it was the idea of God looking at itself through its own eyes.
Ooh,
that was what I was doing. And I got that from Adyashanti, and it's very similar to the same thing. Looking at the nature of attention brings you basically to the same place. But that was the thing that rocked my world. I was practicing that for, I don't know, a week or so. And and then I was talking to my Zen coach at the time and about the fatigue I was feeling, and I remember her saying, "Oh, you're trying to manage your life too much," and boom, something just changed. And it wasn't a new experience of reality. It was similar. It was like, oh, I've been in this place before, and then I just noticed for the first time I saw there was an attachment to it and a repulsion to it, and I saw that I was neither. That was what was different. It was the same kind of awakening-like experience, but for the first time I saw, oh, look at that. There's a part of me that wants it to continue, and there's a part of me that wants it to stop. And I just got, I was neither of those, and then that made it snowball.
Oh, yeah. Because you just unlocked yourself from that duality.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And that was the duality, all the other ones that happened inside of.
Exactly. You got the master switch there.
But I think you're right. I should probably be practicing this what is the nature of attention thing. It's so gross.
Yeah, that's it.
I just got to insert though, because and I've seen this with people and talking with meditators, imagine sitting or doing inquiry or whatever, and when you feel disoriented, nauseated, and confused, seeing that as a sign that it's working,
Yes.
rather than looking for a relaxed, equanimous, harmonious experience. That's not what you're looking for. And it's way more efficient too, because if you can just sit with the nauseation experience for just 5 or 10 minutes, it does as much as an infinite amount of bliss gazing or whatever.
It unplug. It shows up dualistic thought and intention as really low value reality transcribers,
And then we add a whole other thing going on, because I'm doing EBE as well, so I have a semi-differentiated green part or innocent control part that I've been working with, and I just heard his voice saying, "I'm the one attending. It's my attention," and I'm like, and then I would say, "Oh, really? Let's investigate that." Like, you think that's your attention? Where does your attention come from?
Yes.
Where are you getting that capacity from? And then he's like, fuck.
Oh, God.
And then that would work both fears in personhood and sagehood, I imagine.
Wow. You may be that. I've always taught them as, they are really separate tracks, but there are some overlaps. You just described an overlap moment. So
that's why my enlightenment path dead ended, because for whatever reason, my soul was smart enough to not let me wake up all the way, because it knew I needed to do more emotive processing. And what I've seen is every time I take, we've talked about this before, every time I take another emotive healing step, more of the sagehood stuff happens. So it's a little bit like spinning plates, but it all must go. It all must come along.
Let's move toward a conclusion here. Say that phrase again that Aji used. God looking through.
God looking through its own eyes. God looking at itself. So that's you as God looking at all of duality, which is itself, essence and expression. God looking at itself through its own eyes.
God looking at itself through its own eyes. Okay.
Yeah.
So if there was an enlightenment board that certified enlightenments, as soon as that came out of Ajya's mouth, word would get to the board, and he would be excised from being allowed to say he was enlightened, because he would never use God and eyes, right?
Yeah.
But so let's just break it down really quickly. Zen would say what? Pure scorched earth Zen. What would it say?
Zen would say
use the same.
There's a few different options. One would be awareness looking at itself through its own eyes. So then there's not a personification of God. It's just awareness.
We're on the way. Okay.
No thingness looking at itself, non-duality looking at itself through its own eyes. But then it would be like, well, how could it have eyes and self? That doesn't make any sense.
Right. The purest scorched earth version, that all those were heading right in that direction. That was great. Yeah. Is non-duality, not realizing its not realized self. Whoa. Non-duality, not realizing its not realized self. Or even better, non-duality, not realizing the non-realizability of itself.
Wow, that makes me feel so sick I might not be able to eat for the next few hours. Wow.
That would be the scorched earth Zen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so how do we pull them all together? What would Identity's version be? It would be divinity experiencing itself through all of its creation. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So which one of those three simple ways, there's lots of ways to describe them, what appeals to you out there in podcast land?
It's a super interesting inquiry, or a sort of examination of paradigms, because Adyashanti isn't pure Zen. I don't know if he knows that, but it's a blend of just by using the word God, he puts himself with one foot in sainthood.
Right.
And so there's the paradigmatic relevance, but at the end of the day, it's what does it do, just like we've been saying, what does it do in your experience?
Right.
But the paradigmatic frame is also important, because it could be a transcendent thing that might create an interesting experience for you, but would ultimately take you down a dead end path.
Yeah. And we've all got to find those dead ends. What do we say every podcast? Growth comes out of realizations of a dead end. You got to take everything to the end. So in all of this, maybe to leave with a, if this was mildly, if this half short circuited your brain and was also really interesting to you, you got it.
Well done.
That's how I would grade myself if I was listening to this. If I was half short prior to my enlightenment, if I was half the time I was confused, what the fuck are they using words to describe what? And really somehow magnetically interested in this. It worked. The podcast worked.
Bonus points if you felt nauseated and if you felt the terror of not being A+.
Right. So I hope we meet someday, those of you that out in podcast land, where we can actually be in the same room together and not through a screen. Because in one sense, Edenity would say one size does fit all, that we all have to have three triune dharmic paths that one day all converge into one path. Don't start out as the one path, but converge down the line as one path. In that sense, your invitation here is to not take anything we say as a non-negotiable position, and everything we say is an offering of curiosity. In this case, the topics today could be titled meta-existential curiosity, or curiosity in that which is meta to even existential content. So it's divinity all along. It's God experiencing itself through its subversions of itself, while granting the subversions of itself real reality in themselves. And one day all those three paths come together, and hoorah.
Awesome. Wow, we did I was going to say, I say we did, I don't feel like I had much to do with it, really, even though I know mentally, conceptually I did. But I was going to say is we, in quotation marks, covered quite a lot of Identity's Sagehood Dharma in just about 90 minutes. I'm surprised about that, but
yeah,
that's cool.
The high points of it and some of the inexplicable aspects of it that go along with that along the way. So, I wanted to finish with my thought. In one sense, one size does fit all. We've all got these capacities the same. But specifically in Sagehood, I just want to end by saying a really good spiritual educator would not say, I would not say that the one size fits all in what is the best way to focus anyone who's interested in really wanting the pre-dual to find and improve all this stuff to them. It's custom. That what we just discovered there with Joseph was just unfolded. There's a doorway for him to maximize his next steps if he wants to. And I can promise that with Third Eye also, a good spiritual educator could read out, if you ask by half a dozen questions, I could give you likely a set of doors to go through that are specifically would work for you in your challenge to feel the terror of not being and let pre-duality find you. So there's no 10-hour meditating in this paradigm.
There's no 12 steps.
Or 12 steps. It may be as little as inducing it out of you in a non-dual pre-dual field, or it may take 7 or 20 lifetimes before you get there. Let's find out. Find out.
It all starts with what you want, and the hunger that you have. Yep. So the next realization, I'm running out of words. I think I've used them all. I've also been talking to clients all day for 4 hours. So how
about I say it?
Please go ahead. God, I feel a relief. You say the words. Number 8.
Yeah. Next podcast is that you've projected on people so much. you've never been able to really know them.
And that's a combination of personhood and sagehood. So it's a cool thing to follow after this one.
Absolutely. I just got that just as you were saying that. I was going, wait, that just ties in perfectly to partly what we've been saying this time.
Yeah, certainly what we talked about today is useful background. So we won't have to start from scratch, even though in another way, we always start from scratch.
Yes. Amen, brother. Amen.
So thank you all for listening, and shout out to Mike. I had some emails with him recently. He said just a couple of days ago he's on number 50, and it just struck me when he said that today, like, wow, people are like really listening to all of these, and that's a lot of hours. That's 75 hours in 50 episodes or so, and I just felt honored, like, wow, somebody would want to listen to us talk for that long. Like, that's so cool. Thank you. And thanks for being out there. We feel you.
Amen to that too.
Yeah. All right. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey, wherever it may take you. May it be heartful and efficient both. How about that?
Nice. Heartful and efficient both.
All right. Bye for now. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.